We see the C&I market growing, 2025 growing anywhere from 5 to 10%, which is not exorbitant growth, but it's still sustained growth. You know, when you look at the residential market, it contracted significantly. They're looking at flat, maybe up a little bit this year, driven by interest rates, right? Because the average end user there is a homeowner. But the C&I market does see growth.
The commercial industrial market for many in 2025 is ripe with opportunity as perhaps never before in our career, certainly in the nearly 20 years I've been in the solar industry. There is an anticipation, a sense of pent-up demand and energy for the commercial industrial sector and retail off-takers. Who better than to discuss the state of the C&I market for solar in particular than the company that is considered by many the market dominant player, largest market share in most reports north of 40%. So we're going to get John Carroll's perspective from SolarEdge on how the C&I market in 2025 is shaping up. I'm Nico Johnson. We're live from the Power Up Live stage at RE+ Northeast, brought to you by Conductor Solar, Encore Renewables, and Solar Simplified. John, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Nico.
John, let's start with a simple definition. What exactly does commercial and industrial mean in this day and age?
Yeah, so broad definition for the two, but commercial and industrial, two separate focus areas. So commercial would traditionally be aligned with retail, shopping malls, Starbucks locations, gasoline stations, right? And even some manufacturing locations. So low, medium power type loads, rooftop mostly, although some ground mount. Industrial then is usually associated with much heavier loads, big energy hogs on the grid that in some locations in the country can actually cause problems with the grid, instability with the grid. So the commercial and industrial market are very closely tied from a sales perspective and a service support perspective. The concerns that the end customer has are very similar in commercial and industrial in terms of financing projects and O&M of projects. They're very similar.
From a buying perspective, is there anything unique to the C&I market in terms of how the customer perceives the asset that they're trying to acquire?
Yeah. So from a SolarEdge perspective, we're selling to asset owners, developers, and installers. What we call the end user, right? Some of the big box retailers that we work with or organizations like that, their concerns are very unique, and addressing those concerns during the install and during the design and install process are absolutely critical. They are looking at the net present value of a project. They're looking at interest rates. They're looking and trying to decide, do I put this on my balance sheet or do I have a third party and then PPA as an off-taker? So those concerns are there. Then the more holistic, sometimes challenging aspect of dealing with the end user is O&M. And you project a life, and certain components have a life cycle cost in there to refresh and replace. So this becomes a part of the model as well. And an organization like SolarEdge brings a broad service and support organization to help there.
So as we look out into 2025, I'm curious if you give us a quick overview of commercial solar in terms of the trends that you're noticing, in particular this year, that perhaps are evolutions of this market.
Yeah, no, sure. So the three-word acronym is the big one, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. So that's a big one. Let me just put that aside for a second. I think we're starting to see permitting and interconnection in the commercial space is generally a long cycle time. What we're seeing now is some locations, some utilities are pushing through those permits, so they're finally making their way to the market. So the mobilization, the deployment, the install can start to happen, and that's great for the overall market because that means those installers, those developers have to hire. They've got to find people to do this, and there is a shortage of qualified installers in the space today. So that's one, and then of course the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge part of this, and in terms of both manufacturing, incentivizing manufacturing jobs in the United States, and incentivizing an additional tax credit adder for a green energy project. We're seeing that spur innovation in the way end users consider project value and in how asset owners view it when they buy and sell a project. So this is all beginning to create a snowball that's rolling, and with it come additional projects. So the permitting and interconnection process is certainly one of them. The IRA is a second one. I would say the commercial market is lagging residential in terms of energy storage. So this is one where a lot of customers are beginning to look at not just peak shaving and that type of or arbitrage and that type of use case, but backup power for real sensitive customers, semiconductor, automotive, robotics, right? They're starting to look at monetizing this as a part of the package. Still early, but it's beginning, it's pushing these customers to consider CNI solar.
So 24 was a roughly 5 gigawatt market. I think SolarEdge did north of 650 megawatts just in the CNI sector alone. What anticipation or expectation are you all sensing in the market from a total volume perspective? Do you have a sense of that yet?
In terms of volume, we see the CNI market growing, depending on who you look at, what data organization you look at. 2025 growing anywhere from 5 to 10%, which is not exorbitant growth, but it's still sustained growth.
Sure.
When you look at the residential market, it contracted significantly. They're looking at flat, maybe up a little bit this year, driven by interest rates, right? Because the average end user there is a homeowner. But the CNI market does see growth, and I think you're going to, again, storage being one, the IRA being another, but moving permits and interconnection approvals faster is going to be a big part of this job, and we help as an organization with a really dedicated sales and support team to make sure that customers are designing optimally and are incorporating the benefits of a SolarEdge solution into their thinking process. So we see a lot of that helping move the market and grow, and as a result, we're seeing we're going to see more growth than I think the market will. So we'll capture some market share. Yeah,
and you mentioned that the residential market is in fact slowing. I look forward to seeing SolarEdge crest over that 700, maybe get to 800 megawatts deployed in CNI. That would be a great milestone.
Me too.
For the market, and certainly for you, John, with the CNI division. Could you talk a bit about the residential market? Why exactly do you feel like it is slowing down? And more importantly, as that market tries to recover and stabilize, is there a viable path to commercial for these installers?
Yeah. So a lot of the headwinds that the residential market faces, we see in commercial. There's certain differences, like I described a few minutes ago, but the biggest one is probably interest rates, the consumer price index, which affects everything that's purchased, and the data from this morning, it's up again. So that is a direct impact on a model that would be pitched to me at my kitchen table for solar on my home. And that just really clogs the system and slows it down. I think we've seen a lot of that in the last 12, 18, 24 months. As a result of that, we have seen a significant increase in your residential installers, traditional residential developers and installers beginning to look at CNI. And while the cycle times are longer, the projects are usually bigger, which means there's more revenue. They're probably more profit depending on their model. So it might be more enticing for them to get into. There are certain aspects of commercial installation that are very different than residential, because you're dealing with scale and complexity. But they are beginning to consider commercial projects, particularly if, like I said before, the small CNI. If there's a strip mall in their neighborhood and they've traditionally done residential installs, hey, let's go talk to that developer, because I just had coffee with them this morning. And we want to put some panels on the roof.
Do you see any common obstacles or roadblocks, things that traditional residential installers tend to trip over first as they scale into CNI?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things we do with new residential installers moving to commercial is we push them through a commercial certification installation program.
Oh, that's great.
SolarEdge sponsors it. We have it. You can actually get NABCEP credits from it, but it really walks through how to install the optimizers, the DC optimizers, how they work, the benefits of SolarEdge, the commissioning process, and it's all to help avoid any pitfalls when you're actually on the roof, It's particularly a pitched roof. So that's one aspect of it that we push them through. So I think, moving from residential to commercial, a lot of the installers don't necessarily understand those complexities. So we try to work with them very carefully in installing these solutions because they're at a much greater scale.
So the scale's bigger, but I wonder, from an architecture perspective, is there a design engineer looking at a different or more complex structure? Certainly, I think there's some added benefit and long sort of held beliefs around the scalability of module-level power electronics, i.e. the technology that you all help pioneer, versus some of the other opportunities. Historically, CNI tended to be the bastion of string inverters, and it's, I think it's notable that module-level power electronics has taken over the majority share of that market. I guess the question I have is, if I'm a residential installer, am I, apart from like getting certified so that SolarEdge knows I understand the commercial environment, is there an infrastructure change in the way I have to think about architecting and designing these systems?
So 2 points I'll use to answer the question. The biggest thing that we see with residential installers moving to commercial is they're not understanding or grasping the benefits of modular level power electronics, right? Because we're maintaining a fixed voltage at all the individual modules, MLPE, we're able to have much longer strings.
Right.
So they're not necessarily realizing that because a traditional residential roof is much smaller.
Yeah.
Now when you get into the 50, 60, 100 plus kilowatts on a rooftop, those longer strings provide a number of advantages.
Right.
And more complexity in design, but the biggest one being a lower balance of system cost, right?
Yeah.
So they're not grasping that, and as a part of this commercial certification program, installation certification, we walk through that with them so they understand. And you can almost see the light bulb go off.
Right.
Oh, okay, so they really can be that many modules on a string.
I get it.
So that's one. And then I would say the second one is that just the general engineering expertise is usually not there at a residential installer.
Yeah.
So this is where our customer-facing field applications engineers come in terms of assisting with modeling.
Yep.
We have our own designer tool. We can leverage Helioscope, PV-Sys, and we work with the customer to really gut check the single line for the project. And that's a partnership that makes them comfortable, helps them through the installation process, and really builds a long-term relationship with SolarEdge.
I think there's two other elements as well. One we can certainly talk to. The other is handled by any number of folks as you walk around the trade show floor here, and that's the racking. So there's the structural engineering that's dramatically different in many cases for a CNI project, and then there's the financing. My experience is that a lot of the structural engineering, once you've done one or two or three, you partner with a company like Install or similar, Unirac, they have similar applications engineering teams that will help you figure it out. You do have to go to more of you usually have to hire a structural engineer, much different from like the residential approach to point loading and weight distribution on the roof.
Yep.
Apart from that though, the biggest sales engine and one of the reasons why residential has slowed is the financing options available to homeowners, which is tied to interest rates.
Yep.
CNI approaches financing a little differently. You mentioned, am I going to do it on balance sheet? Am I going to do a third-party offer for PA? Could you talk a little bit about the way the CNI market is distinguished with respect to financing for perhaps installers who are unfamiliar with, well, what option can I bring to the boardroom table rather than the kitchen table?
Right, yeah. Generally speaking, your mid-size and small CNI customer is not going to put a project on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
It's the most favorable way to look at this, so they don't do that. So those organizations, some of the bigger ones will, but organizations then make a decision to look externally for financing.
Yeah.
So they're going to look to large investment firms who are buying solar projects or investing into the development of a solar project, whether it's rooftop or ground mount, and then they in turn will offer a certain PPA rate. So this then relieves that customer of the burden of financing the project.
Right.
They're now paying a certain PPA rate, which comes with its own pros and cons, but the O&M is usually not on their balance sheet. Certainly the purchase and the financing is not, and it tends to be a more streamlined decision process for them.
Yep.
So SolarEdge, we work with a lot of those financing firms and investment firms as they look to purchase these different projects or invest in them. We work with them very closely to make sure that the unique value proposition they're offering to the end customer is recognized.
Something else that's unique about the value proposition of the commercial market, in particular with regards to the electrical engineering aspect, is the safety of rooftop solar in terms of what's required by NEC.
Yeah.
We'll mention UL 3741,
Sure.
a code that SolarEdge is intimately familiar with. Can you explain a little bit what UL 3741 is and why it matters?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, SolarEdge was the first solution to be UL 3741 listed. So UL 3741 is a UL standard that essentially defines the PV hazard control on a rooftop. And what it really does, big picture, is it looks at the mechanical spacing between the various conductors around the array, and it stipulates minimum spacing, it stipulates cable turn radiuses and structural adherence of those cables, the location of the inverter within a certain array field as you approach a rapid shutdown, right? So the big difference there with our solution, the DC optimized solution, A, is the longer string lengths that we offer, right? But that's not necessarily a safety issue. B, what you find is that The UL 3741 approach has multiple points of potential failure. And it might not be an electrical failure, it could just be a human installation failure.
Yeah.
If a cable radius is too tight or a wire tie tends to create a lot of friction and cracks the shield on a cable. Things like that can actually create failures in a rooftop installation. And that type of maintenance needs to be built into the model of a 3741 project. Because every few years you've got to get on a roof in 120 degrees in Texas and look at those plastic wire straps.
Yeah.
So that aspect from looking at all these multiple single points of failure, we believe having the DC optimizers behind the panels in a hermetically sealed enclosure that monitors that voltage like I was talking about, monitors the temperature at the MC4 connectors, that's the better way, the faster way, the safer way to rapid shutdown on a roof.
Yeah.
The other aspect of it too, I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, the inverter for a 3741 installation has to be located within the array, a certain distance apart, right? The SolarEdge inverter does not, so ours are typically mounted at the ground.
Right.
So an added aspect of safety is the firefighter, the maintenance worker can walk over to the inverter and open a disconnect switch or access the software in the inverter and shut down the array from the ground before you're even up on the rooftop. Where with a 3741 installation, you can't. You have to get up on the roof close to that high voltage.
Right. Is there anything in particular of note that is an evolution of safety regulations in 2025 you think installers need to be taking into consideration?
An evolution of safety.
Yeah.
I would say, I think, look, we're seeing more and more 3741 approved designs in various customer locations. So we're seeing that as we talk to customers on a daily basis. I would say that from a safety improvement aspect, everything is focused on maintenance on the rooftop, minimizing any kind of fire or kinetic activity on the rooftop.
Yeah.
And while I still believe DC optimization is the better, safer way to do it and the easier way to install it, I'm glad that they're taking a look at the human aspect of this. So I do think you're going to see more of that as we go forward, with a hyper focus on ensuring absolute safety on the rooftop under all circumstances. Yeah.
At a macro level, economics for projects only seem to be getting better. Certainly with the IRA as a tailwind, there are a lot of adders, there are a lot of incentives for increasingly businesses, as in addition to homeowners, going solar. The Trump administration wants to make the American economy an energy powerhouse once again. I'm curious how you see solar playing a role in that, and in particular, is there anything that as an industry we should be focused on, and manufacturers in particular, to increase the likelihood that A, the administration sees solar as favorable, and B, there are economic benefits to the end user? Yeah.
So, I was with SIA last week in Washington, D.C., and walking around the different congressional and Senate offices and talking to different staff members for just that reason. I believe that Republican and Democrat, I believe everybody in the government understands the benefits of solar and what it means. I think at a high level. Once you start getting down into the details, it gets a little nebulous for them. But from my perspective, solar there is no silver bullet to the energy crisis. I think we need all forms in order to form that stable backbone for the grid. Solar, though, represents this significant opportunity to leverage unused space on a roof, right? That you see it when you land in airports now, right? So all that rooftop space is optimal for solar and storage if needed. Ground mount is another huge opportunity that we're just pushing into over the last year with our TerraMax inverter. And there too, there's greenfield, there's brownfield deployments that we can make that again is using or capturing unused land. So a lot of the congressional and Senate members that we talk to don't necessarily get down in the weeds like that, and they don't have to. That's our job. But I think solar is an important aspect and a part of the power energy puzzle that this country faces. So I think it's going to be here in the long term. I think the evolution of the inverter and efficiencies and modules, that needs to continue to occur so that we get more power dense. But I do believe that going forward, we're going to see this as a key part of the mix.
So SolarEdge is a publicly traded company, originally founded in Israel, has a huge presence here in the United States. How are you as an organization looking at the concept of domestic content, what it means for your installer base?
It's huge. It's huge for us. We have invested or created upwards of 2,000 jobs in the United States. We have a factory in Austin, Texas for our residential product, and then a factory in Tampa, Florida for our commercial product. So our perspective is that is what's going to serve Latin America, North America, and export ultimately further outside the United States to the EU or elsewhere. So this is going to quickly become the hub of our manufacturing. The IRA offers some significant incentives to bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, hand in hand with the CHIPS Act. I think this is tremendous. And as an engineer, I'm really glad to see manufacturing back here.
Yes.
I was part of the move that moved them offshore back in the 90s. Now to see it come back is huge. So this is great. That's one aspect of it. The second one that I think does get lost in the mix sometimes is this investment tax credit that the IRA, or production tax credit, both of them that the IRA created. This is an opportunity, we see it, where our installers now have to go out. They've got more projects that are coming through. The permit times are being reduced. More projects are coming to fruition. They've got to go out and hire more people. So in addition to our manufacturing jobs, they're now hiring more people. So the job creation, and this was our message in DC last week, the job creations here is tremendous. And we've got to keep solar in the mix, utilize this, capture this unutilized space, and just continue to create more jobs.
Can you talk about the nature of how the domestic content rules have been updated, in particular the latest guidance that we got on January 16th specifically, and what does that mean for SolarEdge and your installers as well?
Yeah, so the prior guidance indicated a threshold of 40% domestic content in a project in order to obtain the 10% adder. Right? And that would then, in total, with the 30% for the green energy project plus 10, give you a 40% tax credit. That's huge, right? So that was the original guidance. Then when you look at the safe harbor table, an MLPE solution was awarded 35.6%. So, and all you had to do is get to 40. So we have a lot of close partners. You mentioned Enstall, Unirac, PowerClaw, that we work with that combined with our solution get you over that 40%. Okay. The latest guidance, which came within the last couple of weeks, actually took the percentage for MLPE from 35.6 down to 25.8. So with the racking solution, we're now at 44.4%. Right? So we're still over that threshold, still qualifying. Lots of rumors. Nobody knows where anything's going to go. In fact, last week in DC, everybody said, who knows? The administration is only 2 or 3 weeks old. Who knows where it's going in 6 months? But the guidance right now is still 40%. SolarEdge plus a racking solution from a qualified vendor will get you over that 40%. And we're beginning to look at vendors and components that would help mitigate an increase in that 40% threshold if it happens. We're very confident that our solution and a number of our partners and vendors here will be able to satisfy that domestic content requirement.
John, I'm sure there are a lot of folks that have a ton of questions and will want to follow up. How are you all helping keep your installers apprised? How are you educating them? Is there anything upcoming activity that folks can tap into to really learn more about, in particular, domestic content and how it applies?
Great question. So LinkedIn has been one of our biggest social media platforms. Facebook, certainly on Facebook, certainly on X, formerly Twitter, right? But LinkedIn, just follow SolarEdge on LinkedIn. We are hosting a number of webinars with tax advisory firms that dives deeper into the safe harbor table and what you can and cannot do. So tax advisory firms with some racking partners, with our distribution partners in terms of how they can offer warehousing and balance of system supplies. So all of these different webinars are being hosted. Additionally, we have a very active marketing department that's out there constantly sending messages and emails to these different vendors and customers and installers. And then, of course, back to the sales team that's in the country. They're one of the best I've ever worked with in my career, and they are on a daily basis sitting in front of customers, installers, developers, asset owners, end users, distribution partners, and vendors on a daily basis, working and messaging and massaging the domestic content approach so everybody understands it.
John Carroll, thank you for taking time to join us here at the Power Up Live stage.
Good to see you.